Hi, this is Eliza Inkberry with the final class for Gothic Gardening at Darkside University. This is going to be the final video, and I'm happy to answer questions about it if you post in the forums or send me a message on the university page. I will definitely get back to you. I do want to warn you that Carrie is not leaving the videos up for that long, so if there's anything you save to watch later, you'll want to go and do that. Um, so we've already talked about a lot of design principles, and this is not going to just be a design video. This is a lot of different things lumped together because I wanted to touch on some stuff that students had asked for and finish the design principles and kind of wrap things up. But we've covered light. Tried to say line and light at the same time, and that didn't work out. Line, light, pattern, texture, color, variety, scale, contrast, form, and right now we're covering balance, unity, and rhythm, which I really think are so similar that unless you're going to really get into garden and landscape design, and study it in depth, that you'll have a general idea of all three of these together. So I'm not going to show a ton of examples of it. Plus, I think that in a lot of ways we've covered this in some of the other videos that we've talked about because it's talking about using things like repetition and the rule of three. So the rule of three being that you use odd numbers because the eye is attracted to that. And doesn't try to fix it. Like our brain tries to bisect things that are even numbers, but it just relaxes with things that are odd numbers. Um, Starting here with balance as the first one. Balance is, exactly what you think it is. It's making it so one part of the landscape is not weighted more heavily than another, and you can do that through symmetry or asymmetry. Um, and a lot of that is a matter of personal taste. Something that may be asymmetrical may look balanced to you and not to another person. Something that is symmetrical may look balanced to one person and just kind of boring to another, or So it's not a terribly complex thing. It's just how you've laid things out in the landscape, and if you've watched the other videos, then you already have an idea of how to do that. Um, Unity, and I did want to point this blog out because I was looking through it tonight, and it looks really well written. So if you are interested in design, I would recommend reading these in full because there was a lot of thought put into them, and it's more than your average lesson in design. But Unity is, creating a oneness in design, and so a lot of that is balancing things. A lot of it involves the other things that we've talked about, and this person is teaching it from unity by repetition, and we've talked about repetition, unity by dominance, which would be like a focal point. We talked about that a bit in things like contrast and variety. The unity of three, which is the rule of three that we've talked about with using odd numbers in your design. And so if you look at this website, they've got some good images that really give you strong examples of what they're talking about, and the text is excellent. So if you want to check that out, I recommend it. Rhythm, again, this is a lot like repetition, but not always. It's the way things flow through the landscape, so it's like line. And it's the way you have focal points. It's, the way the eye moves from one thing to another. So it's basically repeated elements that makes you feel like you're looking at something that has oneness to it at the end. You're seeing a lot of different elements, and in the end they create one big whole. So that kind of wraps up design principles for us, but if you want to read some more about that, then go right ahead. We're going to move on now to one of the student requests, and I decided that Carrie informs me that perhaps people are not inclined to watch videos after the course ends officially, and so I only did the one video, but I decided that for those of you who were really interested in the student request for good bugs versus bad bugs, I cover that very thoroughly in this blog post on identifying pests and controlling them naturally. And it's also about identification. And so if, the first line in this is consider it Sustainable Pest Control 101. Once you've read this, you'll be an expert at dealing with insects on the farm or in the garden. But it also means you'll be an expert at knowing how to identify things and to find out which end of the spectrum they fall on. So if you're into bugs, highly recommend that. And I'll be happy to chat bugs with you guys because that's my favorite topic. That and plants. Um, they're maybe tied. So definitely check that out, and I hope it helps you out. And we'll move on to okay. So this is my friend Trad's book that's coming out in August. He's the owner of Mushroom Mountain and a mycologist. And this is a book that I'm really excited to get. And I thought that perhaps some of you who were interested in mushrooms and soil and in mycoremediation, which we talked about briefly, is basically where you use a mushroom to eat things that are toxic or otherwise unwanted. So like fecal coliforms or oil spills or toxins. It's amazing what mushrooms can eat. And this is also on mushroom farming, so raising mushrooms to eat. And some of this you can do microremediation and eat the mushrooms because mushrooms break things down so thoroughly that by the time they are fruiting, there's no compounds that would hurt you in the mushroom. On the other end of the spectrum, these are things that will hurt you. There's apparently a lot of castles in Europe that like to do poison gardens as part of their tourist attraction, and so you can check some of the websites for it out. The Alnwick Garden is probably the most famous one, and so if you want to look through Google or whatever browser you use for Alnwick Poison Garden, because they have a lot of different gardens. You'll actually find a lot of photographs and a lot of additional information from people who have been there. And then this is Amy Stewart's Poison Garden that she did. And she's the author of Wicked Plants. So if you wanted a little more detail, this is not a large garden, it's just like a little kind of closely spaced garden that she has. And I wonder how long she had it and if she kept it after the book came out. Because looking at these plants, a lot of them look maybe 2 years old at the most. So it's a young looking garden. And so, if you're looking at this, that could be how long it would take you to have something similar. Of course, it'd be nice if you put something like that inside an enclosed area so that it was separated from, say, curious children who like to taste things and maybe pets. But you can grow your own poison garden, and there's a lot you can do it in any kind of format. You could do it in a herb spiral, you could do it in a little Victorian or Gothic gated tiny garden or courtyard or balcony even. So that's an option for you if you're interested in doing poison gardens. I know some of you said that you were really interested in the poisonous plants, but you couldn't bring yourself to grow them because of the danger factor, and I don't blame you for that. So another thing that you could consider growing is carnivorous plants, and I had a request to do a carnivorous plant video, and I found myself passing over it each time when I was doing videos, and I realized it's because I have grown Venus flytraps in the windowsill, even though they are native to where I live. So if you look here, the Venus flytrap, it's native to North and South Carolina. That's where it's from. And we are actually planning to build a little habitat for it outside, but we haven't done it yet. And I feel like I don't have enough personal experience with growing carnivorous plants to give you a whole lot of information on it. And instead, I decided to find some good links for you. So the Botanical Society of America has a nice website identifying different kinds of carnivorous plants, so you can go through them by order and find a lot of different plants that way. You can join the International Carnivorous Plant Society, so no matter where you are in the world, this is open to you. And they'll give you a lot of information about conservation and how to grow it and things like that. And you get a newsletter. And so there's a frequently asked questions on it, and it has questions like, how do you grow them? How often should you feed them? And then a lot of more detailed questions there. So if that's something that you want to get into more detailed, then of course leave it to National Geographic to have absolutely drop dead stunning photographs of them. So if you want to just look at eye candy of carnivorous plants, which is kind of an odd thing to call eye candy, but that is beautiful even though it's slightly gross and macabre. So, you know, check out the photos at National Geographic. And then we move on to native plants versus non-native plants, because that was one of the student requests, and I was going to do an entire video on this. And then I decided to just let some of my favorite articles and books on it answer the question for me and for you, because I think this is something that you kind of have to make a personal decision about. And personally, I hope that you make a kind of tempered one where you look at it situationally, and each time you're faced with a choice of should this be a native or not native, you think about what situation you're in, and that is how you kind of guide your decision on it. But if you need some definition of what native plants are, here's What's Native versus What's Exotic by Cornell. It looks like their extension service. So this is a good article to get started with, but then I recommend reading two books that I don't think are actually exclusive of each other, except that I know that in Bringing Nature Home, the argument is to be a native plant purist, but I think that there's a lot of information in Bringing Nature Home about how to build your ecology in your landscape that's relevant even if you decide that you're not going to exclusively plant native plants. So this is a really interesting book about kind of the author's opinion that native plants attract more wildlife to an area. And I think that a lot of times that's probably true. There have been some studies, which we'll talk about in a moment, where people have debunked that. But this is a book that I strongly recommend you read, but I also recommend you read it with an open mind to consider an alternative viewpoint, which is that invasion biology is a pseudoscience. And a lot of people really didn't react well to this book because the author was not very soft about how he made his points, and he felt like people were kind of basically preaching to totally eliminate plants that were, quote, exotics, without having a really good definition of what that even means, that it's not really a science, that it's more of an idea that this thing is the other and it doesn't belong. And there was a lot of science here backing up the idea that, nature really just wants an ecology, and it will balance itself out if given the opportunity. And most of the time, the things that are messing up an ecosystem are not the plants, it's the people. So what happens is people go into an ecosystem and they damage it, and then the quote invasive plant may show up, and it wouldn't be there if we hadn't have put trails there or compacted the soil with construction equipment, or bulldozed or tilled, or whatever it is that we do there. Just show up with our shoes that have seeds stuck to the bottom. These are plants are opportunistic, but they may not be enemies, and that's kind of what this is talking about. And if you don't feel inclined to actually read the books on it, then I recommend this article by Toby Hemingway, which I'll admit I pretty closely agree with. And I think that the common permaculture stance is plant natives first. If there's a native plant that will do the job you need, then go for that one first, because it already has a lot of connections to the ecosystem that you're in. You don't have to encourage it to have connections to other organisms in your area, because it's already adapted to do that. So if you can find a native plant that will do the job you need, go with that one. And if not, then exotics are okay. I mean, except if you're in a situation where you're right up against a pristine forest, or in some way your yard will damage the surrounding landscape if you have these plants. And that's not common in cities, and even in kind of rural farmland, because we've already developed things so extensively, and we're already planting lawns with exotic invasives. And he even makes the point that we're already tilling hundreds of thousands of acres and then putting in these monocrops of exotic plants. So one of the arguments that I've heard that I think makes a lot of sense and resonates with me is that if we're planting exotic things that we're going to eat anyway at our house, in our yard, right next to our back door, then that's just a little bit less space that needs to be clear cut somewhere else to farm those things for us. And so that was an argument that really made a lot of sense to me. And in general, I don't have any problem with the idea of an all native garden. I went to one yesterday that was all natives and edibles, and the gardener is very strict about it. And I don't see how that's any different than deciding that you're going to have a garden that's going to be all poisonous plants, or it's going to be all red flowered plants, or all black plants. If that is what appeals to you as a gardener and what brings you joy in the garden, then sure, go ahead and do it. There's no reason not to. So I don't think that, this invasion of a pseudoscience book means don't plant a native garden. I think it more means try not to be too much of a black and white, it's either this way or that way kind of, or just to have that kind of outlook. Um, this is, kind of devil's advocate, I guess. Think about both sides of it and make up your own mind, and hopefully that's provocative and inspiring and something that you're interested in learning about. And here's another article on it, and this was a later article that he wrote, Saving Native Wildlife with Invasive Plants. And this article has some references to scientific studies that have showed that, amazingly enough, animals are already adapting, to exotics in their environment and eating things that they didn't eat before, because one of the things about evolution is it continues to evolve. So that's really interesting to me. But I will say that there are some plants like English ivy and Nandina are the two I can think of off the top of my head that I have never personally observed any wildlife interacting with all that much. I will admit, I have seen birds eating the berries of English ivy once a year when the berries are ripe. And I've mostly seen, which surprised me, robins doing it because I didn't think that robins ate a lot of berries. But and so maybe I was seeing it wrong and they were eating bugs off of the plant, but I thought they were eating berries. Um, anyway, those two plants, I can think of so many other plants in my area that would have so many more connections to the ecosystem that I am encouraging, that I wouldn't choose the two of them. I would choose something similar, but that has, either more human edibility or more soil fertility building capacity or habitat capacity or wildlife food capacity, something that I think would be a better fit for the system. Um, so again, just something to think about. And then I'm going to end talking about foraging because that came up in the class chat tonight. And I feel like foraging is kind of a cool thing, or even planting things that are something that you might have foraged, but you decided that you'd rather not take it from the wild. You want to put it on your own property. We were talking a little bit about elderberries and dandelions, a lot of different plants, and the best field guides that I know of are by Samuel Thayer, and I recommend the Forager's Harvest, and I'm trying to think of the name of the other one. Maybe it'll say when I click on this. Nature's Garden, I think is, yeah. Okay, so those two, definitely the best field guides I've ever seen, and they're different. They have different plants in them, and just a ton of information in there on how to identify them, how to eat them, and he has a lot of personal experience. So you can tell that he's not just talking about it without a lot of firsthand knowledge. And then the other one that I like a lot, and this is free and online, is Eat the Weeds. Now, if you're in another country, none of this may be all that useful to you because this is definitely temperate climate field guides. But you probably have field guides for your area for similar purposes. But if you are in the US or a temperate climate somewhere, then these books will have at least something in them that you would like. And the other ones that you may want to check out are Perennial Vegetables by Eric Toensmeyer and Perennial Vegetables by Martin Crawford. This two different books with the same title. And those are really cool. They have a lot of things that people would kind of consider foraged food that they're recommending as good garden plants. And you can definitely find a lot of extremely weird plants in the list of perennial vegetables. And the same thing, if you're looking through Eat the Weeds or the Samuel Thayer books and you think, I wonder if I could grow this, most likely you can. So that's another interesting thing to add to your garden. So that kind of wraps it up. And if you have any questions, again, be sure to ask them in the forums. And I really enjoyed teaching this class. Thanks for having me, and I wish you the best of luck with your Gothic gardens.